Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to another installment in our reviewed and ranked series. Today we are finishing out the X-Men DLC characters, and there's only one way to end this, and that is with the highlight of the group, and consequently the character after which the DLC expansion is named, Phoenix. Now, Phoenix is a really cool character. I like the way that she was adapted into this game, and there's a lot to talk about, including several very unique features to only her. So as we get into this character breakdown, I am going to remind you once more to check and see if you are subscribed to the channel. If you're not, please go ahead and fix that for me, as I bring daily variety content to you from a myriad of different games. And if you find today's video helpful, interesting, and or enjoyable, make sure that you drop a like. So let's go ahead and talk about Phoenix, starting where we always do with the character synergies. And Phoenix has 6 different synergies, but they are not across 6 types. They are across 5 though. She has 2 mastery synergies with Femme Fatales and Forces of Nature. She has a strength synergy with X-Men, an energy synergy with Women of Marvel, a defense synergy with Family Values, and a resilience synergy with First Class X-Men. Now, there is a really nice spread here, and a lot of the synergies available do play into the ones that I tend to put a little bit more favor and emphasis on. I do like seeing 2 mastery synergies present, and the strength and energy synergies are also very nice to see as well, especially that Women of Marvel synergy, because that is a little bit easier to get without dialing your team into a very specific niche of a character loadout, as you can draw from a lot of different teams and dynamics throughout the cast with that particular role. So definitely some strong points in the team synergy category for Phoenix. Moving on to talk a little bit about the base functions of this character, we have the basic attack sequence. This attack sequence has 4 different segments to it. The first 2 attacks are very linear, ground-hugging, fire energy type attacks that head out in a straight line away from the character. That third attack is a series of 3 of those that fan out away from Phoenix, the middle one taking the standard trajectory while the other 2 branch off a little bit to either side for a little bit of some auxiliary damage. And then that last strike is a much larger flame runner that again follows the trajectory of all of those central and forward facing attacks as it makes its way along the ground. It still makes physical contact with the opponents, in addition to having some quite significant range added to it, so you don't have to worry about opponents attacking into you without yourself being able to counter against them or kind of maneuver around it. And I do like that middle ground with increased range and not having to worry about direct retaliation from your opponents. Phoenix's heavy attack is a larger flame orb that is thrown out and then concussively explodes a little bit in front of the character. Phoenix will also propel herself back very slightly when using her heavy attack. Yeah, it's not the world's strongest heavy attack, but it does have a decent amount of area of effect as that orb explodes upon connecting with her opponents. Phoenix is one of the last characters in the roster that we will be looking at that has a flight mechanic active on her midair jump. And like every other flight and enhanced traversal mechanic we've seen up until this point, this does drain out of your energy point reserves, so use this sparingly, especially while not in combat where you don't have an opportunity to recharge your energy points in between combat sessions. That's really what's kind of pivotal with these characters, is knowing when you can and when you shouldn't be using that traversal item. But it can be quite handy for getting around some of the floor hazards that you run into, especially within the Shadow of Doom DLC, so it's not something you should overlook completely. However, just be very mindful about how you're using it and do not overabuse it. Phoenix's falling aerial attack is fairly similar to her heavy attack. It impacts a little bit further out than where the heavy attack does, and still has an explosion characteristic and animation upon connecting with the ground or with the opponents that it runs into. But like most falling aerials in this game, she is not naturally set up into a position where she would be able to use this out of an ability, so you're not going to practically use the falling aerial as much as you would with other characters. It's still a nice option to have in your arsenal, especially where it does have a decent area of effect to it, and it does involve a little bit of range to keep it some distance away from your opponents. And to close out the standard features of Phoenix, we have her block and dodge animation. She conjures up a circular flame barrier directly out in front of her when initiating a blocking animation, and when you dodge, she will lunge forward in the direction of input. Since she kind of flies around the battlefield, it makes a little bit more sense for her to use this type of an animation as opposed to a combat roll. It's a little bit of a lazier animation, but I can't knock any points off of the character's utility for the way that this particular move was animated, especially because it still proves decently faithful to the way that the character functions and doesn't have any negative drawbacks to the character's performance. Let's pivot over and talk a little bit about Phoenix's abilities. She has a couple of abilities that perform similarly to what we've seen before, but with their own unique twist on the ability. First off, we have Phoenix's Fury, which is a very interesting ability to have in the primary slot because we haven't seen a charge type ability in a primary slot for one of these characters, but it is still quite powerful. This involves Phoenix charging forward in a swirling vortex of energy. You can hold the button down to charge up this attack, and it even leaves a little trail of flame that deals trivial damage to the opponents that might wander across it. Of course, the bulk of that damage being dealt by Phoenix as she charges forward. Now, Phoenix's abilities do perform a little bit differently than most or every other character in the cast, and you will see that with the rank up bonuses that they possess. They still have an increase to the attack damage dealt and the increase to the stagger damage dealt, but most of her attacks have increases to the area of effect of these attacks, which is really quite a potent thing to see as opposed to that reduced energy point cost. As a trade-off, she does have abilities that use a lot more energy points, but there is a way to circumvent that built into her kit that we will talk about later. The Phoenix Fury has the energy attack type and the charge synergy trait, and has a C classification to damage, an E classification to the energy points consumed, and is by far the best stagger damage dealer in her kit, having an A classification to that particular stat. Phoenix's second ability is the Cosmic Might, and this is a burst type attack that emanates away from her character, but it's more powerful than most burst type attacks because it does have more range than other characters such as Captain Marvel and even Cable that we looked at last week. This area of effect is a lot wider, assuming that you fully charge up the attack, which there's some practicality to doing, but maybe not the best attack in all circumstances. Essentially, Phoenix will release explosive energy in 360 degrees around her, and you can hold down this button again in order to charge it up. It has the energy attack type and the burn synergy trait, as it's very fire reliant, which it's interesting that it has the burn trait as opposed to the burst trait, but where it does have a lot more fire intertwined in it, it does make sense as to why it was classified this way. This attack has a C classification to the damage dealt, an E classification to the energy points consumed, and a not so great classification to stagger damage dealt with a D classification, but you tend to see that with these type of attacks where you are sacrificing the overall stagger damage it's capable of dealing for being able to deal damage all around the character and kind of defend her from an onslaught of attacks from any direction the opponents might be coming from. As this attack is ranked up, it still benefits from the increase to the attack damage, but it does gain the trait of adding the fire element to your ally attacks, having that area of effect increased, and finally having the reduced chance of the attack being interrupted. Phoenix's third ability is the Telekinetic Talon, and this one is interesting in the terms of how it works. It's a very brief animation as it's being showcased here, However, if you attack into grunt type enemies, she will lift them up in the air in front of her and kind of suspend them in a very vulnerable state before causing those characters to explode. So a very powerful damage dealing attack, but it's more specifically tailored to crowd control rather than overall battle application. It still will deal damage to any characters that are caught in the fan of the move that takes place out in front of her, so mighty enemies and mini boss characters will still take damage from this move, but it's much better at burning through the smaller grunt type opponents that are present on the field. This ability has the energy attack type, and the bash synergy trait has a B classification to damage dealt, which is one of her better damage dealers, has an E classification to the energy points consumed, and that D classification to the stagger damage dealt. So not the greatest stagger move. If you're looking to melt through stagger gauges, Phoenix's Fury is going to be a much better ability to use, but you still don't want to write it off entirely. As this ability is ranked up, it does benefit from the increased attack damage, an increase to the damage dealt to the stagger gauge, an increase to the area of effect, and finally that reduced chance of the attack being interrupted. Phoenix's fourth and final ability is the Cleansing Flames, and this move right here, we talked about it a little bit in Gambit's Ranked and Reviewed, but this ability single-handedly inspired me to give the DLC privilege rankings to one ability for every character that was added as DLC, more particularly paid DLC. And it's no surprise that this is the winner of that award for Phoenix. The reason this ability is so powerful, it looks pretty lackluster in terms of the stats at an initial glance, but it's the side effects that this ability gives to not only Phoenix, but your team as a whole. This Cleansing Flame ability will create a field that inflicts constant damage upon your opponents, and that damage is converted into energy points that get distributed back to Phoenix as well as the other members of her team once you have it ranked up past that third rank, which is a very powerful and potent ability to have, to say the least. This ability has the energy attack type. It cannot be synergized, but you really wouldn't want to synergize this anyway because it allows you to be in a lot more control of where you set up the ability, and you want to be able to target large groups of opponents when and where possible. It doesn't deal great damage initially, but it does linger over almost 15 seconds and deals damage constantly to the opponents caught within that vortex. It doesn't do anything to trap them inside in terms of slowing their movement speed or drawing them in, but it's very wide in terms of the area that it affects. So you're going to have opponents that even casually wander into it even after it's been set up. So you can kind of sort of write off the damage dealer for this ability, especially because the better utility for this is recharging your entire team's energy points passively over the course of the fight. It requires a little less energy points than the other abilities that she possesses to set up, having a declassification to the energy points used, but you're going to gain that back passively over the course of the field being active anyway, so it's a trade-off that is absolutely worth taking. As this ability is ranked up, it benefits from an increase to the attack damage dealt, a distribution of those energy points to all members of her team instead of just back to Phoenix, an increase to the area of effect of the move, and finally the reduced chance of the attack being interrupted. Phoenix's extreme attack is interesting. It's pretty quick in terms of how it's animated. It takes place over the course of about 5.5 seconds, and that swirling vortex that comes in is reminiscent of the Cleansing Flames, and finally there is a larger concussive blow that is pulled in with a fiery phoenix that delves right into the middle for a larger, heavier hitting finishing blow against those opponents. But this ability actually has a secondary side effect, and that's what I'm going to show you right now. If you use this ability, or when you use the extreme attack, any members of your team that are downed and in need of being revived will be revived as soon as the animation has completely played out. And you'll notice that down in the bottom left-hand corner of the gameplay footage that's playing back right now. You see, prior to detonating the attack, there is all of my team members downed and out, and upon using that attack, they all one by one revive and resume the fight. This only works based off of the assumption that you have revives to use, and it will prioritize the characters in the order that they went down, as opposed to reviving characters that are most powerful. So if you only have one revive and you have 2 characters down, it's going to take the first one that left. So you may end up reviving the weaker of your teammates under that scenario, but you tend to get the revives refreshed over the course of whatever story quest you're going through, assuming that you're not caught in the middle of a big nasty boss fight and need to use that multiple times. It's a very unique ability to her, and it's very powerful. The only other thing to note with Phoenix's extreme attack is it is very highly directional. She will initiate that attack in the direction that she is facing. She doesn't course correct or turn around or do anything else of the sort. So just make sure that you are facing the group of enemies or the mini boss that you want to be targeting when initiating this attack. So now that we've talked about everything that Phoenix has to offer, we need to decide where she belongs on this tier list. And she is a very powerful character, despite the fact that her abilities are a little bit more costly to use. But as we discussed, the Cleansing Flames ability that she has allows her to passively regain that energy point reservoir at an accelerated rate, as opposed to the rest of the members of the team, and even provides a team benefit. So where do I feel that Phoenix belongs? She is easily in the top group of characters within this game. And I think that she belongs in the S tier of characters, just ahead of Gambit. Now I know that Gambit was placed in here very recently, but he just doesn't quite have the overall team build utility that Phoenix does. And the sheer fact that she is able to hit like a truck, revive your team if you get into a pinch, as well as allow your entire team to operate more efficiently by refilling their energy points passively over the course of the fight, that's a lot of really powerful utility that you get out of this character. So really, really high opinion of Phoenix, and she very easily deserves a top ranking along these characters. And the more I've sat and thought about it, I did highlight this in Gambit's video as well, but I do think that I need to bolster Black Panther up a couple of spots on this list. I think I'm going to list him above not only Wolverine, but above Psylocke as well, because he is just such a powerful operative in terms of what he can accomplish, especially with the way that he has recently revolutionized the speedrun meta. And I will talk about the best characters in the game in a couple of weeks once we've had everyone listed on this tier list, but that shouldn't undercut Phoenix's ranking to any solid degree, because she is very easily deserving of this S tier placement. But what do you think? Do you think that there's anything that I overlooked with Phoenix's kit? Do you think there's things that I've oversold or not talked about enough? Be sure to let me know what your thoughts are in the comments down below. And we start into the Fantastic Four next week, so make sure that you are subscribed so you know when those videos come out. Thanks again for your time, and I hope that you have an absolutely fantastic rest of your day.